February 18th, 1944. Attu Island, Alaska. Corporal James William crouched at the mouth of a collapsed Japanese bunker, his flashlight beam slicing through darkness thick as oil. Then he saw them. Eyes, dozens of eyes staring back from the shadows, hollow and unblinking. Not soldiers coiled to strike. Women, 15 of them, barely breathing, wrapped in rags that had once been uniforms. William lowered his rifle. Behind him the wind had changed. The barometer was falling. He could feel it in his bones, that animal instinct soldiers learned on Attu. They had maybe 2 hours before the blizzard hit. 2 hours before anyone caught outside would die frozen and forgotten in the snow. If these forgotten stories of courage move you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, whether it's New York or New Zealand, Tokyo or Toronto. These moments deserve to be remembered. They remind us that even in war's cruelest hours, humanity can still break through the ice. And what James William didn't know yet, standing in that frozen bunker entrance with steam rising from the darkness, was that the next 8 hours would test every assumption he'd ever made about enemies and mercy and what it meant to be a soldier. One of the women stepped forward. Gray streaked her black hair like frost on stone. She wore the torn remnants of a nurse's uniform beneath a Japanese army coat 3 sizes too large. Despite her sunken cheeks and frostbitten hands, she carried herself with rigid dignity. She bowed once precisely, as if they were meeting in a hospital corridor instead of a tomb. Then she spoke in broken English that cost her visible effort. "We are nurses. Please, mercy." And in that moment, William realized something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. These women hadn't been forgotten by accident. They had been left here to die. Not by the Americans, by their own command. Attu was the edge of the world, the westernmost island in Alaska's Aleutian chain, where wind never stopped and fog swallowed men whole, where temperatures could drop 30 degrees in an hour, where cold killed as efficiently as any bullet, and more quietly. The Japanese had seized it in June 1942 as part of their northern offensive, a strategic foothold in American territory meant to threaten the mainland and draw resources north. By May 1943, the United States launched Operation Landcrab to take it back. What followed was one of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific theater. Nearly 550 Americans killed, over 2,300 wounded. Of the 2,900 Japanese defenders, only 28 were taken alive. The rest died fighting or killed themselves rather than surrender. Entire units charged American positions in final banzai attacks, screaming into machine gun fire, choosing death over dishonor. The island's rocks were still stained with blood 9 months later. What few knew was that among those Japanese forces were 15 women, nurses from the Imperial Japanese Army Nurse Corps. They had volunteered for this assignment, one of the most dangerous in the entire war, tending wounded soldiers in the most remote and hostile environment imaginable, where supplies arrived sporadically and medical equipment froze solid overnight. The nurses worked in underground bunkers that leaked icy water and offered little protection from the perpetual wind. They treated frostbite and gangrene and wounds infected by constant damp. They survived on rice rations that dwindled with each passing week. They melted snow for water. They burned scraps of paper for warmth. When the American assault came in May, Japanese command made a decision that sealed thousands of fates. Rather than surrender, they ordered a final mass charge. The nurses were told to remain behind, to tend the dying, to prepare themselves. When the Americans came, they were expected to take their own lives. It was honorable, it was duty. But the battle ended in chaos. Communication lines were severed, officers were killed, bunkers collapsed. In the confusion, the 15 women found themselves trapped in a reinforced bunker that had been overlooked during the American sweep. For 9 months they survived on scraps and melted snow, and the hope that rescue would come. It never did. Their own military had either forgotten them or assumed they were already dead. The bunker became their tomb. Or so they thought. By February 1944, Attu was officially secure. The 7th Infantry Division had moved on, leaving a small crew to run the weather station and clear unexploded ordnance. Corporal James William, 24, once an aspiring engineering student from Ohio, now spent his days cataloging the remains of battles long finished. The first 2 bunkers held what they expected: frozen corpses, rusted weapons, spoiled rations. But the 3rd was different. Steam drifted from its entrance. William halted the patrol. Steam meant heat. Heat meant life. And life might mean holdouts ready to kill. He signaled Private Raymond Chun left, while he and Sergeant Marcus Davis took the right. Private Joseph Kowalski covered from a snowdrift. Chun, a Chinese-American from San Francisco, spoke some Japanese and carried old wounds from his family's flight from Shanghai. Davis was a veteran from Alabama. Kowalski, only 20, still believed war had clear moral lines. William crouched at the entrance and swept his flashlight inside. Eyes stared back, dozens of them, wide with terror, not aggression. "Don't shoot," he called, keeping his rifle up but steady. Figures emerged slowly. Women emaciated, exhausted, wrapped in rags. They moved like ghosts, as if already half dead. Their suffering hit William harder than any battlefield. They looked like survivors of the world's end. One woman stepped forward from the group. She was older than the others, perhaps in her mid-30s, though malnutrition made age hard to judge. Gray streaked her black hair. She wore the torn remnants of a nurse's uniform beneath a Japanese army coat, far too large for her wasted frame. Despite her condition, despite the frostbite blackening her fingers and the hollow hunger in her eyes, she carried herself with precise dignity. She bowed. Then she spoke in halting, careful English. "We are nurses. Please, mercy." The word hung in the frozen air like a prayer. William lowered his rifle. Behind him, Sergeant Davis let out a low whistle. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "They've been here the whole time." William counted. 15 women, all in similar condition. Malnourished, frostbitten, some barely able to stand. One woman sat against a bunker wall, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and labored. Another had bandages wrapped around her hands, black with old blood that had frozen and thawed and frozen again. A third was shivering so violently her teeth chattered audibly. Chun reached for the radio, clipped to his belt. Static, nothing but white noise and the hiss of dead air. The radio was useless. Maybe the cold had killed the batteries. Maybe the mountains were blocking the signal. Either way, they were on their own. William looked outside. The sky was darkening from pale gray to charcoal. The wind was shifting, coming from the north now, carrying the smell of snow and ice. He could feel it in his face, that particular sting that meant a blizzard was building. Anyone with experience on Attu could read the signs. They had maybe 2 hours before the storm hit, and when it did, anyone caught outside would die. That was a fact, not a possibility. He made a decision. We'd take them back to base. Now, Kowalski's eyes widened. Sarge, base is 8 miles through this. He gestured at the darkening sky, at the wind picking up speed, at the temperature already dropping. These women can't walk 8 miles. Half of them can barely stand. William knew he was right. 8 miles in good weather was a long hike carrying full gear. In a blizzard with hypothermic civilians who'd been starving for 9 months, it would be a death march. But the alternative was leaving them here in this bunker to freeze when the temperature plummeted after nightfall. And that was not an option he was willing to consider. Davis stepped closer, his voice low enough that the women couldn't hear. "William, think about this. We've got 4 men, 15 prisoners, and a blizzard coming in fast. The odds are bad, real bad. We might not make it, and if we don't, that's 4 American soldiers dead for enemy nurses." He wasn't being cruel. He was being a soldier, calculating survival, weighing American lives against Japanese lives. It was the arithmetic of war. William met his gaze. "They're not the enemy, not anymore. Look at them, Marcus, they're just people who need help. And if we leave them here, we're no better than the officers who abandoned them in the first place." Davis held his gaze for a long moment. Something passed between them, an understanding forged in months of shared misery on this frozen island. Then Davis nodded slowly. "All right, let's do it." The nurses understood enough to know they were being rescued, though the word felt strange and impossible. They had been taught that Americans would torture them, defile them, parade them through cities as trophies of war. Yet here were these soldiers looking at them, not with hatred or lust, but with something that resembled pity. It didn't match anything they'd been told. The oldest nurse, whose name was Yuki Tanaka, tried to organize the others. She spoke in rapid Japanese, her voice hoarse but commanding. Slowly the women gathered what few possessions they had, a medical bag with empty compartments, a torn blanket, a photograph of a family none of them would likely see again. Yuki had been a nurse for 12 years before the war. She'd trained in Tokyo at one of the finest hospitals in Japan. She'd delivered babies and set bones and held the hands of dying patients. But nothing in her training had prepared her for Attu. She had watched women under her care die from starvation, cold, and infections that should have been treatable. She'd held them as they cried for their mothers, whispered prayers, or simply faded. Through it all, she kept discipline, kept the nurses working, focused, alive. But facing the American soldiers, her control wavered. Rescue meant survival, but also surrender and shame. Her father's voice echoed, death before dishonor. Yet looking at the girls under her care, some barely 18, she chose life. William's men shared what they had: hard biscuits, frozen chocolate, canteen water turning to slush. The women ate slowly, some crying as the taste of food returned. Yuki divided everything evenly among the 15. Then the reality hit William. 3 women couldn't walk. Frostbite had ruined their feet. 5 more could barely move. Only 7 could attempt the march. "We'll have to carry them," Davis said. They made stretchers from tent canvas and broken poles. William and Davis took one, Chun and Kowalski the other. The walking wounded were roped together, Yuki leading. William checked his compass. Base lay 8 miles northwest. In a blizzard with weakened civilians, the trek could take 6 hours if they made it at all. Snow thickened. They had to move. The blizzard hit 20 minutes into their journey. One moment visibility was perhaps 50 yards. The next it was nothing. The world became white, howling, disorienting. Snow blew horizontal, stinging exposed skin like needles of ice. The temperature plummeted. William felt his face going numb, felt ice forming in his eyebrows and on his eyelashes. His hands, even in wool gloves, began to lose feeling. This was how people died on Attu. Not from bullets or bombs, but from cold that crept in degree by degree and stole life before you realized it was happening. William had tied a rope to each person, creating a human chain. Without it, they would have been separated and lost within minutes, wandering blind until they collapsed. Even with it, he could barely see the person directly in front of him. The wind was so loud it drowned out everything else, a constant roar like standing next to an aircraft engine. He carried the first woman on his back, her arms wrapped weakly around his neck. She was small, perhaps 90 pounds. But in this cold, with this wind, with this terrain, she felt like she weighed twice that. Her shivering transmitted through his coat. He could feel her breath against his ear, shallow and rapid. Every step was a battle. The snow was knee-deep in places, deeper in the drifts. His legs burned. His lungs screamed for air. The thin atmosphere of Attu made every breath feel insufficient, like drowning slowly. But he kept moving. One step, then another, then another. He stopped thinking about the distance remaining. He stopped thinking about the base. He focused only on the next step. Behind him, Davis carried another woman on his back. This one was unconscious, her head lolling against his shoulder, her arms hanging limp. Davis had served in North Africa. He'd marched through the Sahara in heat that killed men in hours. He had thought that was the worst environment imaginable. He had been wrong. The desert killed you fast. Attu killed you slow. Chun and Kowalski took turns with the third woman, switching every 10 minutes, because that was all either of them could manage. Chun's face was a mask of determination, but his eyes betrayed his fear. He knew these odds. 4 men, 15 women, 8 miles, 20 below zero, with wind chill, 0 visibility. This was suicide. But he also knew that if they turned back now, those women would die. And despite everything, despite the war, despite what the Japanese had done to his family in China, he could not abandon them. Not like this. The other nurses followed in a line, those who could walk supporting those who could barely stand. Yuki was everywhere, moving up and down the rope like a ghost, appearing out of the white, speaking softly in Japanese, encouraging, demanding, refusing to let anyone give up. She pushed when they needed pushing. She held them when they stumbled. And always she kept them moving forward. The first hour was hell. The wind cut through their clothes like knives. The snow found every gap, every opening, worked its way inside until they were wet and freezing. William's feet went numb first, then his hands, then his face. He could no longer feel the woman on his back except as weight. He could not tell if she was still shivering, and he realized that if the shivering stopped, it meant she was dying. The second hour was worse. William lost all sense of direction. The compass was useless in the whiteout. He navigated by instinct and memory, trying to remember landmarks that were now buried under snow, trying to keep a straight line when he couldn't see 3 feet ahead. At one point he was certain they were lost, that they were walking in circles, that they would die out here and no one would find their bodies until spring. Then Chun shouted. He had found something. A ravine cutting between two slopes, offering a brief break from the wind. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They huddled together for warmth. Americans and Japanese packed so tightly their breath froze between them. The soldiers formed an outer ring against the wind. No one spoke. Conserving energy was survival. After 20 minutes they had to move. Stillness meant death. The cold lulled them toward sleep, but sleep was fatal. William lifted the woman onto his shoulders again. Her shivering had stopped, an ominous sign. Kowalski suddenly collapsed, face pale, lips blue. Chun dragged him up. "I can't," Kowalski gasped. William turned, voice flat. "You will. If you don't, you die. And so does everyone tied to you." Something sparked in Kowalski, and he forced himself forward. When a nurse sat down in the snow, Yuki slapped her hard enough to revive her. Exhausted herself, she refused to let anyone give up. 9 months together, she told William. No one left behind now. The blizzard worsened. Wind screamed, snow erased their tracks instantly. William moved by will alone, repeating, "My name is James William. I will not die here." The woman on his back whispered something he couldn't understand. Another nurse collapsed, barely breathing. Kowalski voiced their fear. "We leave her or we all die." Yuki shook her head. No one left behind. They carried her in agonizing 10-minute rotations. At last the storm eased. The supply depot emerged like a mirage. Medics rushed out as the nurse on William's back opened her eyes. Yuki counted her women 15, alive. She smiled through frostburn. "She lives." "You saved her." She refused treatment until all her nurses were cared for. Asked how she endured, she said, "Death is easy. Living is hard." All 15 survived, though some lost fingers and toes. The American rescuers suffered frostbite and hypothermia, but they lived. The official report was brief and forgotten. Years later, in 1952, Yuki appeared at William's door in Cleveland. She had become a teacher, passing on lessons of mercy and humanity. She gave him an origami crane. When she died in 1989, William traveled to Japan and left a crane beside hers. The story of Attu is nearly forgotten, but for those who survived that blizzard, it was proof that even in war, humanity can break through fragile, as light through ice, but real.